Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Everything Went Black podcast. Thanks to everyone who has been supporting the show on Patreon. If you're already aboard, the first of the premium content has been posted. The first thing being the Guide to Important Music, Episode 1, available only to Patreon subscribers. The first episode features Taz Niles, a former bandmate of mine, and we talk about his band La Gratona, which was sort of ahead of their time back in the 90s. It's really fun. It's always a pleasure meeting up with Taz and discussing things like that. Taz also played in Eye for an Eye. He played in Anodyne with me, and he also played in the band called 27. If you want to support the podcast via Patreon, please check out our page. You can get there through the Everything Went Black Media website. There's a pop-up menu, and it'll take you there. For as little as $1 a month, you can help keep the lights on around here and get a bunch of really cool stuff for free. The aforementioned Guide to Important Music is the most recent thing that's went up. I'll be doing those every month. There's also the Lifetime of Gray Skies audiobook, as well as tons of covers and demo recordings by Tombs, such as the David Bowie cover, Rorschach, and a bunch of other cool stuff. And the party keeps rolling every month. I'll be doing these guides to important music on a monthly basis, and it'll be available to everyone who subscribes. Another way you can help out is just by liking the posts on social media. Tell your friends about it, share it on Facebook, that sort of stuff. Most importantly, actually, is leaving reviews on iTunes. That helps us in the rankings, and it just kind of makes things a little bit easier all around. You can listen to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube, or you can just head over to the site and stream it at everythingwentblackmedia.com. For this episode, I'd like to welcome Ben Umanov, aka Vince Neilstein of Metal Sucks. When I started doing this, the most important thing to me was communication. We can't all have the same ideas and opinions about things. These days, everyone seems to be at each other's throats, pointing fingers, blaming, and drawing lines in the sand. There's a lot of evil in this world, as our current political administration seems to underline to everybody. So it's even more important to remember that we all have a lot in common. To me, it's important to find that common ground and go from there. Anyway, onward to the episode. I hope you all enjoy it. So Ben, when did you start doing Metal Sucks?
So we started Metal Sucks in December 2006. It was me and my friend Matt, who I've been friends with literally since kindergarten. We always shared a lot of common musical tastes, and like any friend you've had for that long, sometimes you drift a little bit apart, you come back together, and there are periods. So we were hanging out a lot again in, I guess, like the mid 2000s, and we were at a show, and I sort of had this idea, and I turned to him, I was like, we should start a metal site that's kind of like Pitchfork, but for metal.
Okay.
Because no one at the time was really doing that. You just had Blabbermouth, I guess PRP was around then. They were kind of just more copy paste press release,
more newsy.
Yeah, more news. And so we wanted to do not exactly like Pitchfork, but something that had opinion in it, which no one was doing at the time. But we also wanted to have some humor in it as well, and our inspiration for that was actually Metal Sludge. I don't know if you used to frequent that site.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was how we started, and it really started to pay attention to it seriously and going into 2007, and it kind of just picked up from there.
Did you have a journalism background, or did you do any writing part of this?
No, I had none of that. What I brought to the table at the beginning was more on the website, just getting it set up, getting the website going, which was very basic and shitty looking at the beginning. But I got the domain and the website set up, very basic. Matt comes from more of that background. He is actually has a film background. So, he has experience in writing and creative thinking along those lines. My background was actually in the music industry. I had a bunch of jobs in a very short amount of time after graduating college. Like I had my first real job started as an internship in in Ann Arbor, Michigan, working for a booking agency that booked like all the has-been rock and metal acts ever. Like everyone from like the Four Tops
Oh wow. Okay.
to like Seven Mary 3 to like Rat and Skid Row. So it was like if you like once had a career in rock or like any kind of rock, like we'll take you. So I started there, and from there I moved back to New York where I grew up, and one job to another. Eventually, I worked for a small record label. I worked in a recording studio. I worked for a producer manager, a guy who manages producers, as his assistant. And eventually ended up at Atlantic Records, managing projects for their web team, which was an interesting experience. Like being in the major label world, it was like not for me, but I certainly learned a lot, and I'm grateful for the experience. So it was like during that time where Metal Sucks really started to pick up. We would kind of sneak in a couple posts, in between. Like Matt had his job; he was at a talent agency for Broadway actors, like as an assistant. And go home, write some more posts. Once we actually started to get like advertising clients and stuff, I would do all that stuff at home, like after hours, like spreadsheets and, and just like trying to send emails, like work out deals, all this stuff. And eventually we hooked up with Frank and Rob from Metal Injection, fellow native New Yorkers doing a very similar thing that we were doing. And together, we got together for the first time at my old place, got baked out of our minds, and came up with this idea to start Blast Beat Network, which is the ad network that we run that sells advertising for obviously our two sites and like Lambgoat, PRP, until recently Decibel, they're doing their own thing now, and like Cult Nation, several other sites.
Okay, yeah. And also the Gear Gods is part of this
Gear
operation
Gods, right, exactly.
too, right?
Yeah, like Gear Gods is a joint venture of the Blast Beat Network. Like that's fully controlled by all of us, whereas Metal Sucks is still just me and Matt. Metal Injection is still just Rob and Frank. Like those are separate companies.
Yeah.
But Gear Gods is fully Blast Beat.
It's pretty cool.
So anyway, like eventually after it got to a certain point when I was at Atlantic, I could no longer stand the major label world, and the website was at a point where it was like earning some money, like not really enough, and like I felt like if I quit and devoted myself to it, I would be able to get that time back to put into it, and that it would pay off. And thankfully, that's what ended up happening. So here we are 10 years later.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, I think, when you're working on a venture and you're doing your day job and you're doing like a variety of other different endeavors to try to make the ends meet. And then there's like that sort of law of diminishing returns, I think. Maybe that's not the right term, but like when you're like, okay, I'm putting, out of a 24-hour day, I'm spending 22 hours doing my job and doing this other thing. And then there's got to be a point, like a sweet spot when you're like, okay, I have to jump off of the one thing so I can devote more time so this thing grows into something else.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's like it's really cool that you guys were able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. It's the same for being in a band, like when you have to decide like, well, I got to go tour for 6 weeks and then come home for a month and then tour for another 6 weeks. And, it's like at some point you kind of have to make that decision to give up the comforts of,
that steady paycheck.
Stable, yeah, like all that stuff.
And that's like now that I don't have a regular paycheck that comes in, it's like I do lament those days of every 2 weeks having a sum of money to show up magically in my account.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a sweetness to that you have to sacrifice. However, going for it and seeing some dividends pay off on that end, I think eclipses any kind of financial, stability I think you can have. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, that's why we're all in metal,
Yeah.
people like ask me, like, oh, it must be cool to have your own business and, like relatively stable money, even though it's not,
Yeah.
automatic, and it's like, I just like to say, like, well, like, no one's getting rich in metal. Like, it's just not how it is. We're all here because we love it.
So you grew up in New York.
Yep.
And in Brooklyn specifically, right?
In Manhattan, actually.
Oh, Manhattan. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you, did you go to the shows at CB's and, ABC?
Yeah, I went to CB's. I went, like some of the bigger shows, like Irving Plaza. Wetlands was one that I was at a lot. Some of the other places that are long gone, like Continental and, places like that.
Did you make it out to any Lemoore shows? Or
I actually never did get to Lemoore.
Okay.
Yeah. Like kind of like we were talking about off air earlier,
Yeah.
that was like a little bit outside the range of like where I was going.
Sure.
Yeah.
So actually, just came in on the wire today that the Pestilence tour got canceled.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and you guys had
Yeah.
something to do with that, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm curious about is how exactly that happens. I mean, just to put it out there, I do believe that you should have consequences for your actions. I think, if you're going to be ignorant and have certain viewpoints that paint you in a certain light, that, portray you as a certain person, that there should be consequences to those actions. Okay. So what's the sort of timeline for how things happen from like making some very, ignorant, racially insensitive Facebook quotes, or I don't really know the whole story, to having your entire U.S. tour canceled?
It varies greatly. In the case of Inquisition, that was, in almost all of these cases, there was somebody that sent a tip to us.
Okay.
With Pestilence, it was screenshots and links to.
And someone sent you that information?
Somebody sent us that information.
Oh, okay. All
yeah.
right.
In fact, in all of the cases that probably you're going to ask me about, it was somebody that sent us information initially. It was like, hey, like, you guys should check this out. So with Inquisition, that was an extremely serious accusation.
Dude, I don't even want to touch that one with a 10-foot pole, man, because it's like, that's
Okay,
so,
well,
that's so clearly like such a dodgy like thing to be talking about, really. With like, pedophilia or whatever the hell this guy is.
It's super dark.
I didn't even want to read about it, really, but I did read it.
Well, so I'll just answer the question. Like, as it relates to this question, that took 2 months between when we first got that tip and when we published the article.
Okay.
Because there was research to do, and there were legal issues to figure out, like, what can we publish? Like, what can we say?
Right.
What are the potential consequences? And, we want to make sure, like, when we put something of this nature out, it needs to be right.
Exactly,
like, it needs to be completely right. With Pestilence, it's different because all we're talking about here is some stupid shit this guy said, and it's like, the post is right there. Like, he said it.
Public
like,
forum,
we
right?
don't, there's like nothing, there's no legal files to research. There's no, like, what else is there really to be said? So with that one, I think it was, like less than a day between when that tip came in and when we published the article.
All right. So the process is someone sends you a tip, as journalists, you vet the material out to make sure it's correct.
Yeah.
And then you post something. Okay. So now the information that I just received via text message, I'm at the
on the air,
cutting edge,
coming in right now.
Cutting edge
wow,
of news as we speak.
That's great.
Was that the tour got canceled? So who canceled the tour? Like, how did that actually come to pass?
I don't know the full answer to that. What I saw on, I guess, Pestilence's statement was that their U.S. promoter decided to pull the plug on it.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, that could be, like, maybe that means their agent. Probably not. I'm not really sure. Maybe there was one promoter who bought all the dates, like maybe it was like a Live Nation or something like that, or I'm not really sure. But From my understanding, it was just a shorter tour. I might be wrong on that.
I don't know. Once again, I wasn't planning on seeing Pestilence, so it's like I'm not sure what the scope of their tour was necessarily.
Right.
But so it could have been something where like maybe someone at their agency was took offense to the material that was he used a racial slur in a Facebook post, and also defended Donald Trump. Which, if somebody took that and was like, I don't want to work with these guys anymore, I kind of applaud that, because it's like,
right.
I think that in the environment that we have today, where a lot of people with some extremely far right leanings are suddenly they're being taken seriously because of the the current administration we have, to use your power as a consumer, or the power you have in business to respond to that, I think is actually a pretty positive thing.
Yeah.
However, one of the things that I don't agree with, though, is that there's always there's been these strong arm tactics that have been happening as a result of some of this stuff. It's almost like we always like to blame the right and the conservatives for being these kind of tough guys throwing their weight around. But then now that there's this very strong unified right-wing contingency, it's almost like there's license from the extreme left to respond in kind at a very in a similar fashion by using violence and threats and things like that.
Yeah.
So I just wasn't sure if the Pestilence thing was Antifa, jumping on board or anything like that.
Not to my knowledge. I'm not aware of any connections with that. I mean, the post, or posts, I should say, because there were a couple, were actually from several months ago.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, no one had picked up on them. And I've talked to other people about this. Apparently, these weren't isolated incidents. There were others, So it wasn't just the guy was just drunk one night and ranting, which not that would have been okay either, but there were multiple incidents. Anyway, not to my knowledge, there was no coordinated effort to bring this thing down.
Okay. So I mean, it's more of you're presenting the information as a journalist then, because that's really ultimately what you guys are doing then.
In this case, yeah. I mean, it is. There is some gray area though, because we, I told you in the open, have always wanted to be an opinionated site. So we're not. We are openly trying to have our biases in what we write. That's always been the case. Sometimes we have to walk that back a little, when it comes to sensitive stuff like this. In the Pestilence case, what can you really say? I mean,
it's all there.
Yeah, it's all there. He's talking about the international Jewish conspiracy and Zionists, and it's dude, come on. Yeah. With something like the Inquisition one, that one we really had to put our journalist, pro-journalist hats on and really just make it as cut and dry as possible. Here are the court documents. We got them from here. Here's what they say. Here's how the case played out. Here's what the evidence, all this stuff. We just presented it.
And that came in as someone sent you that information?
Somebody sent us a very quick kind of tip, what's this guy's name? Jason Weierbach, a.k.a. Dagon, or however you pronounce it, was charged with possession of child pornography and this year, and this was the jurisdiction. You guys should look into it.
Okay, and that was it? That was it. And there was never a question as what this guy's motivations might have been?
He actually did say something about I was well, I probably shouldn't say too much. He had known the person at the time, known Jason at the time.
Okay.
And said he's a piece of shit, basically.
Okay.
And now it turns out that person actually sent that tip to multiple publications.
Right. Okay.
It came out later. We didn't know that at the time.
Oh, okay. So.
but no one else, I guess, chose to. Like Neil Jameson actually wrote a thing about how, for his Decibel column, about how he was sent this tip and didn't do anything.
Interesting.
But in any case, it just well, again, I probably shouldn't say too much. We looked into the jurisdiction that this happened in, and court records are publicly available. Anyone can access them. We obtained the court records and looked through them, and it was like, wow.
Once again, this type of thing is like, very, I would, once I saw that headline, I was like, I think I need to like shut my browser down and like not even really.
Well, what happened was, after these 2 months, and like, again, we like consulted with a lawyer, and there were like all these, this whole process we had to go through to make sure it was tight. We wrote the article, and then we emailed the band's label and said, we're publishing this article.
Right.
24 hours from right now. Would you or the band like to comment? And I think we sent that in the morning. Maybe around 2 or 3 o'clock. I might have my timeline off. At some point, we got a one-sentence reply. Inquisition are no longer on Season of Mist. I think it was that same day, actually. It was. And they didn't provide any other details. Like, you could interpret that as, they're just not on our label anymore. Like, their deal was up. And, so they're on some other label, like chase some other label. As it turned out, the label announced the next morning on their Facebook page that they had dropped the band.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when word started getting in. Then once we saw that, we're like, well, we're not waiting 24 hours now, publish, boom.
Right.
It was almost, whatever it was, like 20 hours at that point or whatever.
But it happened pretty quickly then.
Yeah, very quickly.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's, once again, like, I read a little bit about it. I know that I think what he was charged with and what he actually, was ultimately, I think there was like a plea bargain involved or something like that.
Deal. Yeah.
So I know, and I won't go into too much detail about some of my own personal dealings with the legal system, that oftentimes you're charged with something that's in excess of what you're actually guilty of doing. Mm-hmm. And then you agree to, okay, this is what I did.
That is true.
Yeah.
But you should read the report, because it's very specific.
It's very specific.
It's very specific about like files that were on his computer.
All right, so they have
the names of those files, like the process in which they discovered them.
Okay.
It's like very, very specific.
And that happened like 11 years
But
ago.
I mean, you're not wrong that like, yes, sometimes there are charges in excess of what there are. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I got beat up by a cop when I was 19.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I was charged with assaulting a police officer.
Sure.
All right, because disorderly conduct or whatever is probably not, that's something that they understand that once it got into in front of a judge, or you talk to a lawyer, or you talk to a public defender, I might have gotten off with something less than that. Mm-hmm. So they hit you with something heavier than that, so that the thing that you're actually guilty of is the thing that sticks to you.
Yeah,
so.
that can happen.
Okay.
It can also happen where you're charged with what you did, and then you accept a plea deal for something less. And the reason for that, as has been explained to me by a friend of mine who's a lawyer, is that simply the jurisdiction doesn't want to spend the time and expense prosecuting it. And they're like, well, like if you take this lesser charge, we don't have to do this, and let's just get it out of the system.
So now, just one other clarification about that is, that happened like, 10 or 11 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay, so
2009, I want to say.
Okay, so, yeah, that's like almost, 10 years, essentially 10 years ago. What was he assigned any sign of, community service, or was there some debt that he had to pay to society?
He had to go to sex offender treatment.
Okay.
Or pardon me if that's not the right terminology. He had to go to some kind of treatment for, his charges.
Right.
I don't recall what the other punishments were. I know that was part of it, though.
But there is a sense of him I mean, just playing devil's advocate, there is a sense that
like if you want to make the argument like he served his time,
right?
You could.
I mean, I'm not defending anything that this guy's done. I'm just taking like the sort of objective opinion that say you do fuck up in society, at least in this society that we live in, and you are, the court gives you a sentence to go through.
Right.
And then once you serve that sentence, that theoretically, even though that we know this doesn't exist in the real world, that there shouldn't be any kind of bias held against you. I mean, I know that you can't vote if you're a felon. Certain jobs you can't hold. And if you're a sex offender, you got to register in certain neighborhoods and things like that. Now, did he have to register as a sex offender?
I think part of the plea deal was that he did not.
Okay. All right.
Or there was something, again, like I don't recall the exact details. There was something like he had to go to these classes, and I don't think he ended up on any registry.
Okay, but that was some legal sort of attorney agreement they came up with.
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's interesting.
But I mean, it's interesting you bring up the idea of like paying debt to society. I definitely think there's some basis to that. I also think it depends on what the crime is.
Okay.
So, this one might be a little bit outside of your world of metal, but the Tim Lambesis case with As I Lay Dying, are you...
I am. Even though I do not listen to that band or that style of music, I'm aware of that story, yes.
Right, yeah. So, like, this issue you're talking about came up again with that when his former bandmates took him back basically, and they put out a single earlier this year. This argument was raging. Like, should he be forgiven? He did his time. He was in jail. All of that. And
so, for the benefit of those out there who are listening, who probably don't listen. I mean, I'm assuming a lot of the guys that listen, people we have female. Believe it or not, there are females that listen to this podcast too.
I wouldn't expect.
It's a very dude-centered thing.
I would expect that there would be. Honestly, I mean, there's a lot of women in the metal community now.
But anyway, so for those of you out there who aren't familiar with that case, what's the exact details?
So Tim Lambesis is the frontman of As I Lay Dying, a popular metalcore band from the, I guess, mid 2000s to early 2010s. Attempted to hire a hitman to kill his ex-wife. And was caught when a policeman posing as the hitman caught him red-handed, basically, like trying to make the deal.
Now, wasn't he also, there's some sort of steroids involved or like performance-enhancing drugs or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, he used to be a scrawny dude in the early days and got, by the time all this stuff happened, was incredibly jacked up, and there was some, steroid element that he later tried to blame for his behavior, which I don't really know what to make of that. But in any case, this idea of serving your time, where I sort of landed on it is, yes, you served your time, you served your debt to society. You're a free man. You can live a free life now, and you can, he's gotten remarried, he's, I don't know what else he's doing, but where I kind of draw the line is does he get to play with his band for thousands of people every night? Does that qualify under the umbrella of what you automatically get back when you come out?
Yeah, that's an interesting point because, because there is this kind of, I guess, a karmic sort of retribution for doing certain things. And like I said earlier in this talk, that I definitely believe in consequences for your actions. You know what I mean? So though legally this, in both of these cases, there might have been some minimum served when it comes to the legal system and your position in society. So I guess one of the things that is, there's a line that could be debatable as to that intangible quality, like what are you entitled to regain after you've done all these things, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's up to debate, really.
Yeah, it totally is. And in the case of Inquisition, at least now, this is still pretty recent, it seems like very few people are willing to forgive him. That was one where it was almost universal like, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
With Lambesis, you know, I was shocked, honestly, at like how many As They Lay Dying fans were just like so pumped, like in the comments on the single on YouTube, Facebook, on our site. Like we actually stopped posting, but we like drew a moratorium on posting about him anymore.
So they were excited that he's returning to the band.
Super excited. They're like, yeah, like, and just like saying the most ridiculous things too, like, yeah, like the song is so great, like, so glad we welcomed Tim back. They're gonna show everybody, just like, and it's just like, show everybody what? Like, it's just,
yeah, that's a little disappointing, I think.
You know, and I mean, a lot of people taking this view.
Yeah, that's a little disappointing. However, I mean, in general, like I feel like that. I mean, this is my opinion, that style of music appeals to like a little bit less evolved, kind of maybe less. Spiritually advanced fan of music, maybe. You know,
I don't know, man.
And that's my opinion.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think there are evolved spiritually and unevolved spiritually people in all subgenres of metal.
Well, I guess like just in my exposure to some of the metalcore and like having toured with some deathcore bands and things like that.
Yeah,
there's definitely a.
You're more of like the brute, you know,
like
mosh
the
pit element.
Macho kind of, possibly. Well, I'll straight up misogynistic. I mean, I've seen some T-shirts on some of these tours. You know, like ask your girlfriend what my dick tastes like.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Now, are you surprised that these fucking guys would welcome a dude who had his, was on steroids and had his?
I shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I'm just disappointed.
Disappointed.
Yeah.
Right. Me too.
Yeah.
Because I would like to believe that people have like a little bit more sensitivity in them to see that that's like, not an acceptable mode of behavior, really.
Yeah. But I mean, as well, I'm sure you want to talk about some of the other like black metal bands, I mean, there's defenders there of heinous activities too, and like misogynistic folks in that community. And, I mean, I think they're everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, well, just, once again, to put it out there, just, make no mistake about it. Like, I'm not a proponent of racism or any kind of misogyny or, even racial insensitivity or whatever, any of that stuff. I mean, the creative output that I have doesn't, support any of that. It's mostly about like esoteric sort of, occult themes, things like that. But I mean, it might be a little bit naive, I think, to apply those types of rules. And I'm not supporting anyone who embraces these things, but it's pretty much since day one of black metal, there's been this like very shadowy element to the whole style of music, really, and it's like, you don't really have to look that far to see any of that stuff, even in bands that are vastly successful on a commercial level.
Yeah. Well, that's fine, and that can exist. I think like where I view my role in it is, I think like a lot of people like don't know about some of that, like with Destroyer 666, or like I think like people didn't know, and like so my job is to give them the information and let them decide. Yeah,
because that's a band like the last bit of trouble they got into had more to do with the Me Too movement, I think.
Dude, it was everything they got into.
Yeah, but I mean, the last thing I read about was
that thing in Sweden a few months ago. Yeah, I saw that.
There must have been another one then. But there was, when they were on tour with Watain, there was the venue in San Francisco, which I've actually played at several times, the DNA Lounge. Okay, where the promoter was like, this guy said something about women need to do one thing or another to loosen up, and everything about the Me Too, some sort of. Basically, women got to cool out, no one's trying, the rape thing, whatever. It was pretty disgusting what the guy said.
Yeah. I think it was that he said it at a show in Sweden.
Oh, okay.
And then, the thing in San Francisco
right.
is what happened.
So I was thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, wow, okay, But what about all the white power shit? Like, they're members, they share members. They were.
Oh, well, we've written extensively about that.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah.
Right, okay. But the other thing, too, when I thought about it was like, I've been to the DNA Lounge just last year. I think I've been there like maybe in the last 16 months, I've been there like 7 times or something. And if you're going to take that standpoint about okay, misogyny, there's a tons of like booty, like hip hop shows that happen there too. So, I mean, I love women myself, I have, I don't want to see anyone get raped. I don't want to see anyone be objectified. I don't want to see any of that stuff happen. However, you have to apply rules uniformly across the board, I think, especially if you're a promoter. If you're going to take money, if you're going to make money and sell alcohol and like get a killer bar night, on some booty hip hop show, where the flyer for the show is basically 5 chicks' asses, you also have to take offense to that as well as to insensitive statements by this guy and this band, really. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I agree with part of that.
Okay.
And the part is that you should be consistent. So, you have like a label like Season of Mist, which drops Inquisition after less than 24 hours, but has no problem with Destroyer 666, who have hateful, like actual white supremacist ideologies and just like said terrible shit about all sorts of people. And like, that's fine, according to Season of Mist. But the other part, what you said with, I mean, I just have to say, I really don't know much about the hip hop world.
Yeah.
But, I think there's a difference between women consenting to a photo shoot, and choosing to portray themselves in a certain way.
Right.
Than there is the guy from Destroyer 666 saying like whatever he said about, like those are different things to me.
Well, they are maybe in a primary way, but I think on a secondary, maybe tertiary way, they're not that much different, because I think that imagery sort of puts forth an idea that it's okay to victimize women, really.
Well, I don't know if it's victimizing.
Well,
that's
okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's a difference between
it's debatable.
Victimizing and, like, if I'm a woman and, like, I'm proud of my body, like, maybe I want to take photo shoot, like, maybe I want to make money off that. And, like, that's any woman's right to do that if she chooses to. Okay.
I agree with that. But what I'm trying to say, though, is the way that image is sort of embedded within this creative output, where some of the the lyrical content is misogynistic, basically. Mm-hmm. So the two are linked together. I mean, if there's like, you go on Instagram, there's tons of women who are alternative models, or whatever you want to call them, and that's great. They're choosing to put photos out of themselves, and that's great. It's nice to look at. I look at them, it's great. But I think that when like the sort of like male, uninformed, kind of more ignorant sort of element uses that to sort of create this atmosphere where they're given the green light to sort of, victimize women or, denigrate them. I feel like it's all related somehow.
Yeah, like you're like kind of taking more issue with the lyrical element, like kind of like the culture.
Well, the overall. I mean, I like hip hop. I have, I'm a fan of the music. Not so much the newer stuff, but like I've been since the '80s. I've been listening to hip hop music. Yeah. And I'm not saying it varies. I'm not saying all of hip hop or all of this or all of that, but I think that there's an element of certain. You have to be choosy about what you do, just like with metal. Just like with the stuff that you and I are really deeply involved with, you have to pick and choose the types of things that you want to support or that you want to let into your life, like that energy into your existence,
Yeah, for sure.
So, and that's why I think that being consistent about ideas is super important.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that we do our best at Metal Sucks to do, and like we've definitely made mistakes, and like gotten shit wrong, and like we've even addressed this recently in an article on the site, like, hey, like there's some stuff we said like years ago that like we look back on now and like frankly like we're ashamed that we said that stuff, and like I think some a little self-reflection in that way is important, but we do strive to be as consistent as possible.
Yeah, some of the things that have happened recently, I mean, maybe you're referring to the tour with Taka, which, was it 2016? I mean, That's the only time I'd ever seen them. I think was on the tour that you guys, you co-promoted it.
Yeah,
or
we were a title sponsor of it.
Yeah.
So like, just so like for maybe you, or you probably know this, but like if anybody listening, like whenever a tour says Metal Sucks Presents or Decibel Presents, or well, Decibel has their own tour, so maybe that's not the best example, but like usually when a tour has somebody presenting it at the top of the flyer, usually when it's a media organization, there's no money changing hands. It's just a promo swap.
Right.
So it's like, we promote the tour on our site a little extra than we normally would. Maybe we give them some free ads. We get the guys in the band to do some like guest columns,
Sure.
maybe, take over our Instagram for a day, like that kind of thing, in exchange for our logo on the flyer, like promo for us, which doesn't always happen this way, but ideally everywhere the flyer is posted, everywhere it's listed on all the venue websites, it also says Metal Sucks Presents on it. Like, by the way, this actually isn't even what I was talking about with like things that I was ashamed we said, but we did sponsor that tour in 2016, and just like didn't know, we didn't know.
Right.
But we addressed that recently on the site as well. We're just like, well, obviously we wouldn't have sponsored the tour if we knew.
So now this leads to another interesting development that happened on their most recent tour, which, I mean, one of the biggest things I really take offense to is people telling me what to do. Okay, someone showing up with a ski mask and saying you can't go someplace or you can't wear that type of shirt, or we're going to beat you up or smash your property or destroy your van or let the air out of your tires or threaten people that are close to you. Okay. That I have a big problem with. I mean, I also have a problem with, racism, homophobia, misogyny, all these things. Okay. But that particular tour with Taka was essentially canceled because a gang essentially started threatening people and the promoters didn't want to deal with it anymore.
Well, I think that's part of the story. And I want to say also that I agree with you. Like, I'm not in favor of, that kind of like physical intimidation. But I mean, I think like also in that case, what came to light as a result of it was that this band did have a kind of hateful ideological past, and
I personally
am
not familiar enough with the band to know that. Okay. Right. I mean, I saw them one time and it was a tour that you guys sponsored, and and I'm not a big fan of the music necessarily. There are other bands to listen to that I think are a lot better than Taka. So anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No worries. So I think like Antifa kind of got the ball rolling on that one, and then it kind of like took on a life of its own. And like, I do think those threats resulted in some of the cancellations and that, but then as a result of that, these venues or promoters started to get word of like, oh my God, what are these guys singing about? Like here's this picture of this guy with a swastika on his chest. Here's a picture of the guy with like the Muslim like moon, crescent moon thing, like X'd out. And it sucks because you don't always know. You just don't always know. Like if you're booking an act or if you're writing about one or sponsoring a tour even, but we live in a time now where unfortunately maybe we should Google that before, we commit, and like it sucks, but like, like I don't want to have to look up whether any band that we're talking about has like these connections, but sometimes they do.
So, I mean, what was, like, how did you get your introduction to black metal?
Like I was not into black metal during, like all the 90s, all the stuff that was coming out of Norway.
Right.
Like I wasn't really aware of it at that time. Like I was a young teen, and like I just like the European stuff wasn't really on my radar.
Sure. Okay.
like, and I guess over the years I sort of, became of all the stuff that everyone's aware, like Burzum and, and Dark Throne and Emperor, and all that stuff, and sort of started diving into that. And then like really, I guess, started like diving more deeply into black metal when the American stuff started coming, like
Leviathan,
like middle 2000s kind of, like Nocmistium, like when that stuff started coming around was where I like more like took to the genre more.
Yeah, because I remember it was for me. I mean, I'm a bit older than you, so like in I think 95 or so, I was on tour with my band that I was in at the time, and we stopped at our record label's office, and there was like a magazine there. It might have been like, Rip or Metal Hammer or something like that, Metal Maniacs maybe. And there was like this whole article about black metal. And I was like, oh, like the Venom record, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember on that tour reading the article. It's about these bands. And pretty much from the first minute, I was like, Burzum, wow, that's like, this guy, got to watch out for this guy. You know what I mean? Like, someone to keep your eye on. You know what I mean? And I guess maybe having been around the hardcore scene and and actually seen white power skinheads at shows, I knew that there is a potential threat from people with extreme viewpoints like that. And I think I sort of edged into black metal knowing that you had to be super vigilant about what bands you're going to support, because I even looked up on a site like years later when I got an internet connection. I remember one of the first things I looked up was, by then I was deeply into like black metal and extreme death metal and all that stuff. And there was like a list of bands that were NSBM or whatever, and that's like, early attempts to kind of, disseminate like who's who and like who has these extreme political ideas and all this sort of stuff. So, I mean, even to this day, when I hear of like a European band that plays in the black metal scene, in the back of my mind, I'm always like, well, how far removed from white, from National Socialism are they really,
Right, totally.
And, I mean, but some of the bands I think they get pegged with that don't really have any political agendas. And it's kind of like a dangerous,
like who?
Like, I don't believe Watain has like any religious agenda aside from their satanic dark circle.
Well, let's make a distinction here, though. Like, there's one thing to say the band doesn't have an agenda,
right?
And then there's another thing to ask what the individual members' beliefs are.
Okay, that's a good point.
Okay, so that's kind of the way that they skirted around the photo. They're like, we're not a political band. We don't sing about politics.
Right.
Or, I mean, that's not even political to me, but whatever. If we use the term political to like broadly encompass politics, social issues,
sure.
Like anything kind of like...
Yeah, we'll just throw it, we'll define it as that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but they said nothing about the beliefs of the individual members of the band. So like, and to me, that's just like such a bullshit response because it doesn't confront the issue.
So we're talking about the photograph of the guy Seek Hailing, right?
Right.
And then, so that was the response, that the band itself doesn't have a political agenda.
Right.
Or anything.
And and then they kind of went on to use this language that the alt-right has adopted of like a witch hunt and blah blah blah. It's like once you start seeing that stuff, it's like, guys, like, come on.
Okay.
Like somebody in this band, probably that guy who was doing that, has some pretty extreme views.
Yeah, I mean...
And, like, I don't want to support that, and I want to let my readership know about it so they can choose not to support it if they also don't agree with those ideologies.
But aside from that photograph of the guy Seek Hailing, you don't have any actual proof that he has any NS leanings or, just by omission, I guess you're assuming that he's guilty of something like that.
I mean, you don't see... many people going around Seek Hailing. There were some videos of him doing it at live shows, so it wasn't just like a one-time incident.
Yeah, well, I'll call the famous Phil Anselmo video.
Right, sure, yeah.
And I mean, do I believe Phil Anselmo is a racist in the way that like Richard Spencer is a racist?
Right. No, absolutely not.
I don't.
Yeah, no.
Okay. These Europeans that are Sikh hailing, do I believe that they're racists in the same way that Richard Spencer is a racist? I don't know. I don't have any proof to say one way or the other, really. You know? Phil Anselmo is on video Sikh hailing and yelling white power. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's like.
And on top of decades of stuff that other musicians and people in the industry have shared privately.
Okay. I mean, I sure. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, but the thing is that do I believe either of these guys are organizing people to, you know, in groups like the Traditionalist Workers' Party or something like that? Mm-hmm. I think that there's like, you know, once again, I'm not defending. I mean, I would never, you know, for me to publicly seek hail and use this sort of language is unacceptable. You know what I mean? But that's my personal viewpoint on this thing. Okay. You know, I can't say what these guys' thoughts are on it. You know, I mean, back
clearly
in the 80s,
they have, yeah, like I see what you're saying. Like there's there's scales.
There's scales. You know? And then even within that, there's like, okay, people are being branded Nazis and fascists and all this other stuff, but then possibly there's just certain people that are, I mean, like my dad. My dad voted for Donald Trump. Okay, my cousins, they voted for Donald Trump. Is he a Nazi? You know, I don't think so.
No, I mean, and I wouldn't say that.
Yeah. You know,
but if you're Sieg Heiling,
right, that,
you know, like that's definitely way farther on the scale.
Sure.
You know, so.
But you should have to answer for that. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, you know, and I mean, like, this guy knew what he was doing. It was a posed photo.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, what, you know, why are you doing that if you don't?
One possible answer to that question could be that people are, it's like taking a piss out of what people are accusing other people of being. I mean, look, I'm not.
I mean, that photo was old, though.
I don't know. Was it an old photo?
It was older, yeah.
Okay. But it's debatable, I think. You know, I mean, people do that stuff all. They do. I've seen people do things like that, like Phil on video on YouTube. A guy like captured that, put it out there. Phil's a Nazi. True or false?
I don't think anyone said Phil's a Nazi.
I've seen many people say that.
Okay, well,
maybe not in the press. Maybe not in the press. I'm not saying you did, or maybe not the press, but you know, you can go into, you know, once again, like Facebook comments and, you know, just conversations with people. Oh, I've known that guy was a racist all along. I personally don't know Phil Anselmo, so I can't really say one way or the other. I do know other people around him, you know, like in other bands that he's familiar with, friends with. Mm-hmm. You know, and there are real threats out there, though, and that's I guess the point I'm trying to make is that you can focus on these things that are questionable, or you can actually focus on the real threats.
I mean, I don't think it's that questionable, and I think we can focus on all of it.
Okay. You
know, why? Like, yeah, let's focus on all of it. Like, why give this kind of behavior a pass in our community?
Well, I'm saying it's fine to write about it. I mean, I support the fact that people are showing this to the public. But, you know, my one concern, though, is by straight up, I mean, I'm not saying you're guilty of this, but some people are just throwing these terms around. And by throwing these terms around, they're redefining the meaning of some of these words. And that's like a dangerous position to be in with people.
Sure. Well, if you're trying to make the argument that we should be careful about the language we use, then wholeheartedly agree with that.
That's really what I'm trying to get at.
But where I stop is, you know, if you're trying to make the argument that there's bigger problems out there that we shouldn't be focusing on Anselmo or this guy in Watain or, you know, whatever it is, then, you know, I don't buy that argument. Because it's a problem, you know, it's a problem for, I mean, well, it's a problem just societally.
Yeah.
To be signaling that this kind of behavior and hateful ideologies are okay, even if it's lesser on the scale than, say, Richard Spencer. But B, like, I don't want to support those people. And I think that a lot of people who maybe were fans also might not want to, given this knowledge, you know, like wouldn't want to. So here's the information. Do you still want to go to their shows and, you know, and buy their records? You decide.
Well, that's a good way to put it, you know, and, but, you know, once again, you know, I think it requires more investigation really to just by omission because the person didn't deny it or didn't admit to it that he's the negative side.
They all
of that.
deny it.
Okay, not some people don't though. I mean, there are functioning groups of people out there that make music that embrace this sort of ideology openly.
Sure.
Well,
anyone in a moderately successful band is probably going to deny, that's what's happening. Like even with the guy in Destroyer 666, who like anyone you talk to will be, and like I've talked to people who,
right.
Like know that guy and like actually said to me, like he does have those views, but he doesn't want them publicly discussed.
Oh, okay.
Like actually said that to me.
Well, that's something to consider then.
Yeah,
for sure. And like I said, like I'm aware of forever, for years, for a decade or so. I've been aware that those guys have had are share members with, they have members in Destroyer 666 that were in well-known, I don't know if they were Oi or Blackmail or whatever, but these like, national socialist bands,
mm-hmm.
and I've often questioned whether or not most people knew about it that supported them.
Yeah, I think clearly some do. I actually saw a guy with a Destroyer 666 tattoo, and it's like, that guy knows. He
definitely
has no fucking compunctions about that. But, I think a lot of people didn't, and I think a lot of people were surprised. And some of them chose to abandon the band, and some of them chose to keep being fans, and that's a personal choice.
Right. So, once again, the use of language, would you define those people as Nazis or fascists or whatever if they continue to buy their records and see their shows?
The fans?
Yeah.
It would depend on like I can't really say.
Yeah.
But I think the most of the people that I've encountered that are fans, it's always but the riffs.
Okay.
Like these are people who like the music so much that they'll overlook these. Like people say, like I can separate the art from the artist.
And what's your feelings about that?
I can absolutely not separate the art from the artist. Like I do not want to support anyone who has these views.
Right. So that offends you?
It offends me that these fans would be able to do that. I don't know if offends is the right word. Again, like language here.
Sure.
But like disappoints me.
Okay.
And like they're like friends of mine even.
Okay.
Like people coming up in my Instagram feed who are like, sick. They like whatever got like the record in the mail or like mail day, and it's like that record, and I'm like at the same on one hand, the guy one person in this case I'm referring to is like, I'm not surprised at all.
Okay.
But also it's disappointing, it's like, man, like I like that guy. He's not like a close friend, but
I get it. He's like
somebody in the metal industry.
Sure.
And like it's like, oh man,
So the band you would say is offensive to you then? Like that's putting, like say Destroyer 666 for example. Do you find them offensive?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah.
Okay. So now, one of the things is that I believe that yes, you can be offended by things, but there is no rules saying that somebody can't offend you. Do you know what I mean? Because Lenny Bruce back in the day, his whole career and his whole livelihood and his life was like thrown in the toilet because he was offending people, and I'm a huge fan of Lenny Bruce. I think, I love his comedy, even though it's a little dated. I read his book and everything. It's great, and yeah,
well, yeah, I see where you're going. Like, I think we make exceptions for stuff that is near and dear to us.
Right.
And we kind of come up with mental gymnastics that allow us to kind of make it okay, like to justify to ourselves why it's okay for us to continue liking, and that's certainly some of what's going on with Destroyer 666, like definitely Pantera.
Oh yeah, okay.
And like for me,
well, actually, does Pantera have racist lyrics? Or I mean, I know their fans are kind of weird sometimes, but
I
don't think they have any like out and out like racist
I don't
ideologies.
think so. Yeah, but like again, that's that thing we were talking about with Watain, where it's like, well, just because the band doesn't mean it's okay that the members do. So
yeah, but I don't know if that's true or not true. If anyone in that band's a racist, or I mean, maybe
in Pantera.
I mean,
well, it turns out Phil Anselmo, you know.
All right, well, that we touched on that, but I'm talking about like. Maybe by, like we could generalize and say because they're from the South, they have like racist ideas, or they had the Confederate flag on their merch or whatever, but I mean, I don't know Phil. I mean, all I can see is the stuff that I see in the media, really. Yeah. And I know less about any of the members of the band, and nor was I ever a fan of their music when I was a kid, really. So
I was. Okay. So like that's kind of why I'm bringing it up. Okay. Right. So like, to me, like that was one where like I seriously had to have a moment with myself to be like, fuck, like what do I, and like honestly, like it's not about me really in a way. That's kind of like selfish to like make it about me, but nevertheless, like I have to make a decision. Am I going to like continue to support Pantera or not? And like, as a member of the media, I'm sort of in a weird position, and sort of the balance that I've struck with myself, the mental gymnastics, if you will, is like, we're not covering any of Anselmo's newer projects. We've stopped doing that. No mention.
Okay.
Like sometimes I'll give myself a pass on old Pantera when it comes on at the jukebox at the bar or whatever.
Okay.
Is that okay? I don't know. I'm still kind of figuring it out. Like I'm still like figuring out where I fall, as far as how I feel about that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think that, I mean, once again, I don't know. This is the first time we met, so I think it's the first time we met. But it's definitely, my feeling is that it's ultimately up to the individual to make these decisions, though. And I think, however, I do. I think that as a member of the media and the press, that it's totally cool that you bring these things up.
And especially as a site that has always been very upfront that these are our opinions. We're not trying to be unbiased here.
Right. I think prior to this discussion that I always felt like there was like, some kind of united front with Metal Sucks and Antifa or something like that. You cook up all these like conspiracies in your head.
And like that's what people think, and like listening to your podcast with Kyle.
Oh, Kyle, right. Okay.
And just seeing like comments on the internet, and I see like people saying that, and it's like, no, like that's not how. Like we have no affiliation with Antifa at all.
Because like, I'm sorry to cut you off like that.
Fine.
Because like they're such a nameless, faceless organization that like, I mean, I travel all over this country, Europe, wherever. I see things, I talk to people, and like, some of the ideas that people have about Antifa and Metal Sucks comes up quite a bit. People, oh yeah, man, I think the guy that runs Metal Sucks is an Antifa, and like, there's all these ideas out there. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, okay, I mean, I don't, I take everything with a grain of salt. And I was just curious as to like if there actually was an affiliation between any of your ideas and like what's going on with this.
None at all.
Group.
Like no official affiliation, and no even like we identify with that mindset. Like nothing. There's no correlation even.
Yeah, because I see that. I mean, I guess my first experiences with Antifa was actually in Europe. I mean, I've never been on the wrong end of the stick with them necessarily, but I've just seen the power that they wield in Europe with hardcore and punk and metal shows. Mm-hmm. And we were on tour with a band called The Secret. This is several years. I mean, like maybe 10 years ago at this point. And we're on tour, and the singer Marco is from Slovenia originally. Or no, he's born in Italy, but his family's from Slovenia. And there's a photograph of him wearing a Burzum t-shirt, and Antifa was like, oh, you guys can't play in Nuremberg because this dude there's a photo of him wearing a Burzum t-shirt. And then Marco has like reached out to the promoter, and he's like, well, whoever sent this email to you, I'd like to talk to him about it, and maybe we can come to some kind of agreement or something, and, you know, or find out, maybe he could find out what I'm about, and maybe we can keep everything on the up and up and cool. And then no one ever responded to him, and the show got canceled. And, not that this really is anything, but like, you're out there depending on, you're traveling across Europe on a shoestring budget, and you can't really afford to have shows fall through. You know what I mean? We're not in the tour bus. We're not, eating deli trays every night, that kind of thing, throwing TV sets out hotel windows or anything. So that was like my first, I never even heard of Antifa prior to that. And then I was like, oh, what the fuck is this all about? And then I met people over the years that were part of it, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I get where you're coming from. Totally cool. However, when this net gets cast in such a wide berth that it ensnares things that just are completely irrelevant to the cause, I think is like a really dark path for an idea that actually started as a good idea. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, and that's just like, even just recently I was in contact with someone about potentially doing another European tour over in Europe, and he was telling me just his problems with Antifa and how, like bands like Aranci Pazuzu, have had problems with Antifa, and there's nothing racist about anything that they've done, or, it could just be as simple as a kid at a show. And this happened, actually. We were playing a show in Berlin, and they weren't letting kids in who had like Burzum pins on their jackets.
Yeah, well, the Germans are very sensitive to that kind of stuff.
Rightly so, man.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can see that about them. I mean, they, hey, man,
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
The Third Reich was German, But that sort of mindset, I feel, and no one loves gangs more than the United States. You know what I mean? Gang culture, it's like such a huge thing over here. No one loves violence more than the United States, and people in the United States do. And I think just in the political environment that we have right now, everyone's on edge. Everyone's looking for a reason to just go buck wild and start smashing shit. That I just think that, like, someone needs to put some kind of governor on these guys. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I just don't agree with it. I just don't agree. If you want to make a stance about something, show your face. Have people come and question you. Open up dialogue. You know what I mean? Not just like, all right, we don't want this band to play. We're going to bust heads if it happens. Because I've had that happen to me completely outside of politics. In the late 90s, I had problems with a gang in Boston. We were on tour. Promoter gets a call or an email from some anonymous guy about if this band plays in Boston, there's going to be trouble. And it's just like, we played anyway. There was no trouble. But that sort of mindset of intimidation, I just think, is a poisonous idea that puts you on the same level as their opposition. Like you're no better than these thugs who are on the right wing. If not you, but someone who is subscribing to that mindset. And I just think it's a dangerous landscape to try to navigate.
Yeah, I agree. And like, I can't really speak for Antifa.
Yeah.
Okay. You kind of started to learn about them sort of as the same time I think a lot of people did, like right after the Trump election or inauguration.
Yeah.
When they sort of started to come into the national consciousness. That's like, I back a lot of what they stand for, but not all of it.
The methods, I think, are completely fucked, honestly, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But I think that if we have to descend into brutality to get our point across, that we have to give up on rhetoric, then we might as well just fucking call it a day in this country, man. Because, there's enough of that in our current administration.
Yeah. Although the video of Richard Spencer getting punched in the face is fucking amazing.
All right.
Other than that.
I have one thing to say about that, okay? I would love to punch Richard Spencer in the face. However, I'd face him like a fucking man. I would not.
No, neither would I.
I wouldn't
Absolutely not.
hey, look over there, man, and then like sucker punch him like that. I would be like, put your fucking hands up and let's do this. But that's just me, And but that also leads into how I feel about Antifa. It's like they're a bunch of marauders who are just going to sucker punch some guy, And look, there's nobody more than me that wants to see Richard Spencer get his ass kicked. But I just want to do it in an honorable way.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I don't really have a whole lot to say on Antifa.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not something that I've spent a ton of time thinking about or have any association with.
So what's next for you guys, man?
Who knows? I mean, this pestilence thing kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about the Marduk thing? Because you didn't mention that one. That was the other.
We got everything out there. That's why go into that?
Okay, I mean? All right, fine.
I forgot about. I totally forgot about Marduk.
Yeah. You know? So what's next? I mean, to be honest with you, we've rarely planned what's next. Like what's next for the majority of our now 12 years as a website almost has just been what's in the headlines today. You know, and like occasionally, I mean, that's not entirely true. Like we've planned out stuff business wise, like what we're going to, obviously, like as I was saying at the top of the show, Blast Beat Network, that was like a plan, and we launched Gear Gods and that took a lot of effort. Content wise, we've been doing more video stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
We've just been doing like more like lighthearted stuff, not like hard hitting news reports.
Yeah.
And, we'll just have to see what happens tomorrow. It's always something interesting.
So like the video stuff, is it going to be like, multi-part, like documentary type stuff or like?
No, probably not. That stuff is just prohibitively expensive to do. And there's really not much return on it. Like the only people you'll see doing that are companies with like a lot of backing, like like a Vice or or like I guess like Banger TV was doing it.
Yeah.
But they have
Canadian, right? Banger TV?
Canadian. They have a lot of money from the Canadian government. So, no, it's like more lighthearted, just like quick stuff. And we've been doing this for the last 2 or 3 years. Like, and I'm just talking promotional, just fun kind of stuff. Like when the Black Dahlia Murder had their new album out, we took Trevor out to Times Square. And he was kind of the on-camera host to like play tourists the new album and like film their reactions.
Oh, cool.
Just like like silly stuff like that. Yeah. We got Zach Wilde watching YouTube covers of himself. Just
Dude,
like goofy shit.
I saw Zach Wilde play with Ozzy at Ozfest last year, November, and they were doing all these Sabbath songs, and they added a second guitar player in Ozzy's band so Zach can go off even more.
Oh.
Yeah, it was like taking inappropriate solos, I think Zach Wilde's like, if they're, once again, Pantera, if they were ever going to do a Pantera reunion,
of course,
Zach would be the shoe-in.
Yep.
Don't you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I enjoy watching him play, definitely.
And he's an unbelievable player. And just like for me, like my background as a metalhead, like No More Tears was one of the albums that got me into metal. So like that's kind of like the side that I'm like coming from. And his performance on that, as far as I'm concerned, is perfect. Like it is just unbelievable, every single song.
Yeah, Zach Wilde's definitely the
But
man.
like he's also a character.
Yeah.
Like that guy, he's just like...
He's from the tri-state area, too.
He's from Jersey.
Yeah.
And like he's just hilarious. He's just one of those people that when you're around him, he's just like, everyone is laughing. And he's just like... He's who you would expect.
I haven't met him, so... But,
yeah.
So, Ben, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the afternoon and meeting me and talking to me about this stuff.
Thank you for the invite. I was honored and flattered to receive it. I'm grateful for the opportunity to kind of explain some of these things because like you were talking about at the end there are some misconceptions, and like I think people do jump to conclusions about what we've done, and they don't necessarily know what the process is, or who we are, or why we're doing what we do. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about all that.
Awesome. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll see you guys soon.
This dawn is burning.